August 5th, 1962. Los Angeles woke up in silence. In a small house in Brentwood, behind drawn curtains and white sheets, the most famous woman in the world lay still. Marilyn Monroe was gone. She was only 36. The news hit like thunder. Reporters raced to her door, fans gathered on the street, and the whole world stood frozen, asking the same impossible question. How could someone so adored die so alone? She was the face that defined an era. The perfect smile, the platinum hair, the red lips that could stop time. But behind the sparkle, behind the dream, there was a woman who had been searching all her life for something simple. Peace. Fame had made her immortal, but it had also made her invisible. In the glittering world of Hollywood, no one had ever really seen Norma Jean Baker, the fragile, frightened girl she had been before Marilyn was born. The police called it an overdose. The newspapers called it a scandal. But for millions of people, her death felt like the closing of a chapter in human innocence. A reminder that even beauty, adored and worshipped, can break under the weight of its own reflection. Outside her home, people left roses, candles, and letters. One note simply read, "We loved you more than the world ever did." And maybe that was the truth. She belonged to everyone, but she never truly belonged to herself. That morning, as the cameras flashed one last time, Hollywood's golden light dimmed. The dream girl of the century had vanished and left behind a question that still haunts the world. What is the price of being loved by everyone, but known by no one? Before she became Marilyn Monroe, she was just Norma Jean Baker, a little girl born into chaos. She came into the world on June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles, the city of dreams that had no room for hers. Her mother, Gladys, struggled with mental illness. Her father was a ghost, gone before she could speak his name. There were no lullabies, no bedtime stories, only whispers of hospitals, foster homes, and locked doors. Norma Jean grew up moving from place to place, never staying long enough to call anywhere home. She was passed between foster families, relatives, and institutions. At one point, she lived in an orphanage where the smell of disinfectant replaced the warmth of family. But even then she dreamed, not of fame, not of riches, but of safety. She used to say later in life, "I used to think as a little girl that if I became famous, people would love me and everything would be fine." When she was 16, in an attempt to avoid returning to the orphanage, she married her neighbor, James Doherty. He was kind, but it wasn't love. It was survival. While he went off to war, she worked in a factory, painting airplane parts for the army. One day, a photographer came to take pictures of the women workers and saw something in her that she didn't see in herself. A light, a presence, a face that could change a lens, and maybe the world. Soon after she signed her first modeling contract, the name Norma Jean disappeared. The studio executives wanted something easier, something that glittered. And just like that, Marilyn Monroe was born. A name as luminous as a stage light, as fragile as a match flame. She dyed her hair platinum, practiced her smile in the mirror, and learned to turn pain into performance. Every glance, every laugh, every gesture was calculated to charm. But it came from somewhere deep and real, the little girl who still wanted to be loved. She became what the world wanted to see, the perfect fantasy. But inside, she was still that lost child, waiting for someone to hold her and say she could stop pretending. Fame came quickly, but peace never did. And though the cameras captured every curve of her body, they never once captured the woman who lived inside the image. Hollywood was not ready for Marilyn Monroe, and maybe deep down, she wasn't ready for Hollywood either. When she stepped in front of the camera, something happened that no one could explain. The light seemed to find her, to bend toward her. She didn't just act, she shimmered. Even in silence, she spoke louder than anyone else in the room. At first, she was just another blonde with a pretty smile. The studios gave her small parts, a secretary here, a chorus girl there. But the audience saw more. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a softness that made even her laughter sound like a secret. By 1950, she was no longer the girl on the sidelines. In the asphalt jungle and All About Eve, she appeared for only a few minutes. But no one forgot her. Producers called, magazines fought for her face. America was falling in love, but fame came like a storm, sudden, thrilling, and dangerous. In 1953, she starred in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. The world exploded. She wasn't just an actress, she was an event. Her walk, her voice, her laugh, they weren't learned, they were lived. Still, behind that glowing surface, Marilyn was terrified. She studied acting obsessively, wanting to prove she was more than a body. She read Dostoevsky, studied with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, and spent hours dissecting scripts. She wanted depth, truth, art, but the studios wanted only curves and box office numbers. They gave her diamonds and punchlines when she was asking for meaning. On screen, she was pure light. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Some like it hot, the 7-year itch. But off screen, she was haunted by the loneliness of success. She once told a journalist, "I'm one of the world's most visible people, but sometimes I feel like I'm invisible." Men loved her, or thought they did. She married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, then playwright Arthur Miller. One wanted to protect her, the other to understand her. Neither could save her. Her need for love was too deep, her fears too old. She wanted to be held, not idolized. But the world only knew how to worship her from a distance. Even as she reached the top, the cracks began to show. The sleeping pills became routine, the drinking more frequent. She was often late to set, fragile, trembling. The studios called her difficult. The truth was simpler, she was breaking. Yet when the cameras rolled, the magic returned. Every take, every scene, it was as if she poured her entire soul into the film, knowing that once the lights went out, she would disappear again. The woman everyone wanted belonged to no one, not even to herself. And so, Marilyn Monroe, the most photographed woman on earth, began to vanish behind her own reflection. The higher she rose, the more she faded into the myth she'd created. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a movie star. She was a global obsession. Her image was everywhere, on billboards and soldiers' lockers, in magazines from Tokyo to Paris. Yet behind that image, the woman herself was slipping further into shadows. Her marriage to Arthur Miller, the intellectual love she thought would finally give her peace, was collapsing. The man who once saw her as a muse had begun to see her as a burden. Their relationship, once tender, became another stage where she had to perform. She longed to be loved for the quiet person she was off camera, but no one seemed able to separate the woman from the myth. Her health was deteriorating. Insomnia tormented her. Anxiety stalked her nights. The studio executives, impatient with her lateness and fragility, called her unstable. But she wasn't careless. She was scared. Scared of being forgotten, scared of being unworthy, scared of herself. The little girl inside her, Norma Jean, still whispered that love must be earned and that every mistake meant being left alone again. In 1961, she was admitted to a psychiatric ward after a breakdown. The nurses took away her clothes, locked the door, and treated her like she was a danger to herself. It was Joe DiMaggio, her ex-husband, the man she had divorced years before, who came to her rescue, demanding her release. He remained one of the few people who saw her not as an icon, but as a woman. He later said quietly, "I'll never stop protecting her, no matter what." When she returned to Hollywood, things had changed. The studio system was fading, the world was moving on, and Marilyn was caught between eras. She wanted to reinvent herself, to be taken seriously as an actress, not a fantasy. She signed on to new projects, studied hard, and tried to prove that the girl everyone desired still had something to say. But the more she fought for control, the more control slipped away. Doctors prescribed her pills, to sleep, to wake, to calm, to focus. Her friends worried. Her voice trembled during interviews. She laughed less. The press, ever hungry, sensed the cracks and widened them. Headlines mocked her fragility, painting her as a lost woman spiraling out of control. But few noticed that she was surrounded not by friends, but by people who needed her fame to survive. Agents, doctors, lovers, all orbiting a star that was slowly burning out. And yet, There were moments when the real Marilyn still shone through: a private smile, a handwritten note, a spontaneous laugh. On the set of The Misfits, her last completed film, she gave a performance so raw it felt like a confession. Directed by John Huston and written by Arthur Miller, the man she was losing, the film mirrored her own heartbreak. She played a woman trapped in a world of men who couldn't understand her. When the camera rolled, it was no longer acting, it was truth. But truth in Hollywood rarely saves anyone. She was fired from her next film, Something's Got to Give, after too many absences. The studio called her unprofessional. Days later, she posed for a series of photographs, ethereal, luminous, childlike, and mature all at once. It was as if she knew this would be her farewell. That summer, the phone calls grew quieter, the nights longer. She began to speak less, to write more. In one note found later, she wrote, "Please don't make me a joke. I just want to be wonderful." On August 4th, she went to bed early. A few hours later, the world lost its brightest illusion and its loneliest soul. The headlines the next morning spoke of tragedy, but those who had loved her, truly loved her, knew it wasn't the pills or the fame that killed her. It was heartbreak, disguised as starlight. The morning after her death, Los Angeles didn't shine. For once, the city of dreams seemed to mourn one of its own. The newspapers called her the last goddess, the eternal blonde, the woman who made America dream. But for those who truly looked, Marilyn's death wasn't the end of a fantasy. It was the unveiling of a truth. She had lived her entire life under a light too bright for any human being to bear. And in that light, she left behind something greater than fame: a mirror. A mirror for every soul who ever felt unseen, unloved, or misunderstood. In the years that followed, Marilyn Monroe became more than a movie star. She became a symbol of beauty, yes, but also of fragility, of the silent price of perfection, of how fame can immortalize a person while erasing the very heart that made them human. Her estate, the money, the image rights, the royalties, passed to her acting coach, Lee Strasberg, and later his widow. Decades later, her likeness would earn hundreds of millions of dollars, but her true fortune wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in memory. Every photograph, every frame of film, every whisper of her name, all carried the echo of a woman who had wanted nothing more than to be loved for who she was. And because she was never fully loved in life, the world decided to love her in death. Generations have grown up knowing her face but not her voice, her laughter but not her silence. And yet, somehow, she remains vivid. That breathless giggle, that tilt of the head, that way she looked at the camera as if she were confessing something only you could hear. Feminists later reclaimed her as a symbol of a woman trapped in a system that sold her body but ignored her mind. Psychologists studied her loneliness. Artists worshipped her beauty. Musicians wrote songs about her tragedy. And still her eyes, captured on film more than half a century ago, look alive, as if she might blink at any moment. Andy Warhol's portraits turned her into a pop icon, a face that would never fade. But what Warhol's colors couldn't capture was her soul, that fragile light between innocence and experience, the space between Norma Jean and Marilyn Monroe. Elton John sang it best decades later when he wrote of another lost star: "Your candle burned out long before your legend ever did." That was Marilyn, a flame too bright for the world to handle, a woman whose story became myth, whose myth became eternity. Today, at her resting place in Westwood Memorial Park, fans still come quietly. No cameras, no noise. They leave red lipstick kisses on the marble, letters written by strangers who feel like they've known her all their lives. Some are young girls, some are grown men, all whispering the same thing: thank you. Because Marilyn didn't just act. She didn't just pose. She gave the world permission to ache, to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to want love without shame. She taught generations that beauty without tenderness is empty, and fame without peace is hollow. She once said, almost as a prophecy, "I'm not interested in money, I just want to be wonderful." And maybe she was, because long after the applause faded, the world still speaks her name. softly, almost reverently, as if to keep her alive one breath longer. On the day of her funeral, the world stopped pretending. There were no flashing cameras, no directors shouting for retakes, just silence, broken only by the sound of weeping. A small crowd gathered at Westwood Memorial Park, hidden away from the noise of Los Angeles. There was no red carpet, no press, only a casket of white roses and the faint scent of perfume that still seemed to linger in the air. Joe DiMaggio arranged everything himself. No Hollywood glamour, no fake tributes. He banned the movie executives, the agents, the hangers-on. He stood quietly beside her, a man who had loved her too late but still loved her completely. For 20 years after her death, he sent roses to her grave 3 times a week. He never spoke of her again. He didn't have to. In that quiet cemetery surrounded by strangers who had adored her, the myth dissolved and only the woman remained. Norma Jean Baker, the girl who had once believed that fame would bring love, was finally at rest. And yet she never really left. The world still dreams of her, still quotes her, still paints her face on walls and screens and hearts. Because somewhere deep down, everyone recognizes a piece of her story. The longing to be seen, the ache of loneliness, the fragile hope that beauty could somehow heal the pain inside. Marilyn Monroe's life was a short movie. Brilliant, chaotic, unfinished. But her afterlife became a language of its own. She taught the world that light and sadness can live in the same soul, that the strongest people often hide behind the brightest smiles, and that love, the kind she never quite found, is what makes us human at all. As night falls over Los Angeles, her name glows softly on old movie posters, on vinyl records, on whispered memories. And if you listen closely in the distance, it almost sounds like a voice, laughing, warm, still alive. 2 questions remain, floating like cigarette smoke in the Hollywood air. What does it mean to be remembered forever if it costs you your peace? And can a legend ever rest when the world refuses to let her go?